Hello, I'm Doug Smith. This is a special edition of Portsmouth This Week, the voice of Portsmouth Town Hall. With me today are Town Administrator John Klimm. Welcome back, John.
Thank you.
And our special guest is Michael Vagent from the Center for Research in Meriden, Connecticut. The Center for Research in Michael's group just got through doing a telephone survey of the town, and I just wanted to kind of talk through how this thing went and how it looked like from your perspective. First, welcome to Portsmouth.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
I know you conducted this survey a couple weeks ago over a certain period of time, and you're going to be presenting to the town council the results of this survey. How many Portsmouth residents were contacted for this survey?
We completed a total of 600 completed surveys with town residents. That represents a margin for error of plus or minus 4%. And a lot of folks think sometimes when you get into the number of households versus the number of completed surveys, I always make the joke that when your doctor's taking blood out to check your cholesterol, he or she doesn't take out all of your blood. It's a sampling. It's a scientific sampling, and we completed the survey with 600 folks. Okay, so,
because that was my next question, really, we have about 8,000 households or so in Portsmouth and about 17,000 residents, and it just is kind of interesting statistically to me that 600 can give you that sort of probability of.
Yeah, there's a whole process behind it utilizing U.S. Census information, group blocks and census tracts, and including both cell phone and landlines. We have the ability to scientifically capture, proportionally speaking, the households within the different areas of your town, of your city, of your state, and even nationally, if you're doing it that way, the proportional population contribution. It's a very complex process that randomly determines which households or cell phones get captured.
Yeah, I think that was key, because a couple of people were asking me why wasn't I called or something, and I think when you're looking for 600 people, which you say gives you a 95% probability of kind of capturing the thoughts of Portsmouth in toto. I just wonder, how do you go about, is it simply some kind of algorithm that you plug numbers in and then you come out with telephone numbers and these are randomly generated?
Yep. It's absolutely computer generated. We plug in a lot of the different variables, and in part of that program is the census tract and group block information. So the computer, knowing the area that we're calling into, who we're trying to capture, the number of households, all of that stuff is incorporated into the algorithm. And it's actually, you know, typically you get about a 10 or 15 to 1 call to completion ratio. So we don't capture every single person that we call. We make up to 8 callbacks with what's called the original sample frame to make sure that before rules of replacement kick in, that we've captured that true random sample. So there's literally thousands of phone calls that get made, and whether you're on the lucky list or not, or that the computer decides. And that allows it also to remain independent and objective. It's not that we're calling his 400 or 600 favorite friends and family to answer the survey. It's a true random sample.
And so it doesn't concentrate in any particular area of town or anything else. It's just really...
Unless we determine for a particular reason, if you're calling into a city within a state, for example, and there's a hot button issue, sometimes you might oversample a particular area, but not in this case. This was Portsmouth residents randomly sampled.
Now, how was this survey created, and how did it get tailored to Portsmouth's specific situation?
So everything that we do at the Center for Research is custom to the clients that we work with, and we've worked with over 150 municipalities in the 30 years that we've been doing business, 15 of which that I've been with the company. And so how we do that is we sit down and identify what the goals are of the client, in this particular case with the town of Portsmouth, and really understanding what it is you're looking to capture. There were some areas that folks wanted to track and benchmark along the way. And then we dive into what are hot button issues, what are specific and unique to your town, and dive into those areas to really see if it's just a few folks that are talking loudly about that particular issue, or if it really is truly an issue of concern with town residents. So it's a customized survey draft, and after an initial meeting, we sit down and develop a draft of the instrument, and then it's back and forth with town officials to make sure that it's not just the questions we want, it's developed with the team, and the town officials had had final sign-off on approval. So nothing that we do gets done without the approval of town folks here.
Sure. So I assume, John, that included Gary Crosby and other folks in town hall as well.
Yes, we did have staff involvement. We were looking at two areas. The first and foremost from a management standpoint is that we wanted to have the opportunity to ask our citizens what they think about the various services that we provide, whether they are supportive, whether they would like to see changes, eliminations, reductions, additions, or expansion, and the like. And that is critically important as we put our annual budget together, and we'll be using the information from this survey as we complete the budgetary process this year. Secondarily, there are some issues. We're right in the process, right at the beginning of a redraft of our comprehensive plan, and so we designed some questions around economic development, growth and change, open space issues and the like, to get the feedback that our planning department needs to be able to effectively complete that redraft of the comprehensive plan. We also worked very closely with our school committee, who is in the process of implementing a strategic plan, and we included some 3 or 4 questions on their behalf as well.
I can see this would be very useful data for you all to have. Back to the basic nuts and bolts of this thing. What happens if a kid, a 14-year-old or 12-year-old, picks up the phone and starts answering? Is there any age requirement, or is there any residence requirement of the person you're talking to?
Absolutely. So we ask for one of the heads of household, either 18 years of age or older. They must confirm that they're a town resident, and also one of the heads of household. So if it's a very mature-sounding 14 or 15-year-old, there's some that sneak by, but they don't necessarily want to spend the time and answer questions. And we can, part of the quality control process is our project directors, myself included, listening in. We have an in-house call center, so all the calls that we make are done in-house from our Meriden, Connecticut location. Our name shows up on caller ID as the Center for Research, so it's none of that unavailable or private business. And we listen in on our calls to make sure that A, they're sticking to the script, and B, making sure that as our researchers are trained to follow the script and stay on task and get through the survey, that we're making sure that the responses are logical. And when you get a young person on the phone trying to sneak through, for 5 questions in, you start to realize, okay, this isn't the right person.
Let me talk to your mom or dad.
In which case, we would terminate the interview at that time.
And what about things like, I know in my household I have caller ID because everybody gets so many robocalls and stuff. What do you do? So you get an answering machine, people look at it and say, I don't know those guys, even though we publicize, I think, the name of the company. And then you say you call those folks back several times, and then if they still don't answer, they just kind of get bumped down and you pick somebody else up? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, and once we start getting to the tail end of the callbacks, in a lot of cases, we'll leave messages as well and explain who we are and why we're calling. And you'd actually be surprised, quite surprised, how many return phone calls we get. Hey, I saw this number on my caller ID, and who are you? Oh, well, we're conducting a survey on behalf of the town. And once folks realize that you're not selling anything, and as a research firm, by law, we're not allowed to. So if folks have telemarketing experience when they come to interview for our call center, we don't hire them because they tend to be more aggressive in nature. But we also have bilingual researchers right on staff, so that folks that might speak Spanish as their native language also have the opportunity to answer the survey in a language that they're comfortable with. So in-house, we can answer both English and Spanish-speaking surveys right at the same time.
I noticed this included landline telephones as well as unlisted phone numbers. What about cell phones?
Those are also included in the sample. Predominantly the under 30 age group these days are predominantly cell phone only households. So when you take into the consideration all that information about where you live, that's still part of the group block and the census information. There's a few more hoops that we have to jump through on the cell phone side, but it's so important to get them included because that allows us to get that younger demographic captured. But more importantly, by doing it by phone, it allows us to dictate the sampling frame and the way in which that proportionality works out. If we did a mail survey, for example, you have a tendency to get more highly motivated folks returning the survey, and you might not properly represent each of the parts of the community. So you have a tendency in the mail survey to get more folks that are really happy or really angry, more of the outsides of your bell curve versus those folks that have a tendency to hang out in the middle, if you will.
Yeah, we found the same thing on web surveys, same kind of thing. It's,
yep.
you know, especially when you're asking people, do you use the web? And if they don't answer, of course.
Right.
But for those of us who didn't get a phone call, can you kind of walk us through a typical survey? I mean, somebody calls up and they identify themselves and...
Yeah, so within the survey instrument, which I believe is going to the actual survey instrument will be posted online, we explain who we are and why we're calling, and that we're calling on behalf of the town of Portsmouth. We identify who we are and what the nature of our call is, and we call our research staff our relationship specialists. They have about 15 seconds once we get you on the phone
to make the connection, yeah.
To make that connection and build that relationship and build some trust. And once we go through there and we explain that we have nothing to sell, we start taking you through the areas within the survey instrument, which range from quality of life to why you moved to town, why you live here. It's a variety of different topics, and again, we can get that survey instrument posted so you can look through it and read each of the surveys. But most importantly, when we develop our survey drafts, it's developed in a very independent, objective fashion, meaning that you're not going to see 5 opportunities for a positive response and only 1 for a negative. It's equal on both sides, because our job is to not point you in the direction, but to really capture where folks are, where they feel, what their satisfaction levels are, what their dissatisfaction levels are, but more importantly, what's driving each of those things and what's the real reason behind the scenes of why they live here, what they like about the area, and what areas they'd like to see improved.
Yeah. Now, typically, is there a typical time frame that one of these takes on the phone? 15 minutes, maybe?
We try to keep it much less than that. I think our goal in this particular case was less. It was actually, I think it was less than 12 minutes. What typically happens is our goal is to get into that 7 to 10 minute range, because that allows us to capture a lot of different areas. But most importantly, a lot of times when the survey goes long, it's because the respondent
wants to talk about
it. And they want to share, and that is part of the relationship process. It's them understanding that we're here to help. We're here to help the town make decisions, based on information, based on data, versus based on hunch.
Now, were people in Portsmouth generally pretty cooperative with your calls?
Absolutely. And again, once the pre-communication that you did through the town was extremely helpful. Any time that we can pre-communicate that we're going to be calling in this particular case, it was March 18th through April 5th, so there was some pre-communication that went out ahead of time. That really helps. It takes some of the confusion out of the equation. But as I mentioned when we first sat down, you can always expect about a handful of folks that will call up. They're looking out for the best interests of the town. Some folks just don't like surveys, so no matter how nice you are, or how slow you speak, they'll call up and complain, and that's to be expected. That is every single community that we call into, and it's part of the equation. I think we had 2 or 3 calls that came in, and that's to be expected.
Well, I've heard some good feedback from some of my neighbors, at least, on very positive responses to the ones that are lucky enough to get the survey. We kind of think that they're lucky anyway, but so that's working well for you, I think.
Excellent.
Topics generally. I know you went. There's a nice sort of list of the key highlights in your report. Maybe what we can do is just go through it if you want to just try to hit the highlights, particularly like questions about what is the quality of life, for example, as a starter. That's kind of a key one. That's an important one for all of us, and certainly for John and people in town government to have an understanding of.
Absolutely.
How does that work out?
So the chapters or the areas for investigation, much like a book has chapters, the chapters within this survey were quality of life in Portsmouth, satisfaction with town services and programs, contact with the town of Portsmouth, and perceptions of elected officials. So this was, as I called into town, how did that interaction go? And I think one of the important things is when folks were calling in for a question, not a complaint, but when they were calling in with a general question, they walked away from that experience with a much higher rating of the town prior to when they called. So they were having a really good experience. Plans for managing development and change in Portsmouth, types of facilities and services residents desire in Portsmouth, how public funding is utilized in taxes, quality of public schools, road and traffic, and then most importantly, we always capture at the end of every survey a number of different demographic areas so that we can slice and dice the data. When we talked about, and I'll just go through a couple of quick results, Overall, when we ask folks about their overall quality of life in Portsmouth today, you all should be quite pleased that 89.3% provided an excellent or good response about their overall quality of life. And we talk about municipalities that we're doing work with today. I've seen those numbers in the 40s and 50s recently. You know, we've been through a couple of tough years with the economy, so we're seeing those numbers rise. But to see 89%, and the reason that folks lived here, why you might expect. They were born here, they were raised here, proximity to highways and where they work, family members, and the you know, just the community feel that they have here. So those are some of the reasons. If there was one thing that Portsmouth could be doing to improve the quality of life, roadways and sidewalks came up by about 22%, no surprise.
Oddly enough, huh?
More business development in the town center and downtown in an effort to create jobs. Taxes, lowering them either or maintaining them, and these are the usual suspects that we see in these municipality surveys. And what really is the question, when everybody expects to hear taxes, but it's about how people view the quality of services that they receive for the taxes that they pay, and that number was on the higher end. So folks are seeing the value. But you really start diving into things, and there's a lot of circumstances where folks will say, well, we want this and we want this, but we don't want our taxes to go up, and
which kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah,
yes.
and so, but there's a lot of different ways, and over the weeks and months that come, part of our service is to provide you with unlimited support. So, you know, as you get a first look at these results and you say, okay, what does that mean? We're here to help you guide along the way with that. So jumping into some of the town services and programs, considering both the services provided by the town and the taxes you pay, we saw about 73% provided a very good or good response, and that's a good number. About 6% provided a don't know, and about 20% provided a poor, very poor, and then we dive into what they meant by that and wanting some additional services and those sorts of things. The level of communication between town government and residents, we saw about 65% said that it either meets or exceeds my expectations, and there was 28% who said, I would like more information. And so what we've uncovered in the survey here is those pieces of information that they would like. So moving forward, you'll have some direct information about communication that specifically folks are looking for, so that can improve that
And this
number.
might include things like more web access data and forms and things like that.
Exactly. And, you know, roads and things came up, and you both chuckled that that was something that, you know, moving into
We weren't surprised.
Yeah, and so what we want to capture is, and there was, you know, that was a part of our discussion early on, is what do you expect to show up, and what are the hot button issues, and let's try to dive into those and understand, would folks be willing to spend more money to improve those roads? And, you know, there was some back and forth on that, so we'll work with you to help make sure you understand that. You know, the town of Portsmouth government is open and interested in hearing the concerns of issues and residents. Again, 76% agreed with that statement. So
Sounds pretty good.
these numbers are pretty high, and so sometimes, you know, if you look at a number, a 75% can be a great number. Sometimes it cannot be a great number. Other times a 30% can be a great number. If you're talking satisfaction, 30% is not such a good number. So that's some of what will help you understand and how you match up and compare against some like type municipalities. Continuing on, in terms of town vision and development, maintaining the quality of the school system was rated as the top priority by about 54%. One of the initial things we look at there is, okay, was there any difference between those that had children versus those that didn't? And in this particular case, there wasn't a real big difference, a couple of percentage points. Typically, the folks that have kids are very strong about the school system. Others that don't aren't so much, but this town is in agreement as a whole that that's the #1 priority. Management of raising taxes and rates, keeping taxes low, preserving open space. Your community kind of gave us a roadmap, or gave you all a roadmap of what's important and how to prioritize decisions. Now, this becomes one tool in your toolbox. It's not how you prioritize everything. There's more things involved, but this is one other element that allows you to say, okay, what did the town say in this, and how can we prioritize that based on other information? When we dove into development, 65.7% of respondents reported they agree where development is taking place. When you remove those who provided a don't know response, that number jumped up to 82%. So in short, where you're doing your development, folks agree that it's in the right place. And the top 5 businesses that folks believe that there are too few of in Portsmouth were really entertainment opportunities, clothing and shoe stores, large retail, small retail, and hotels. So again, more driving jobs and revenue into town.
Sure.
So those are just a couple of areas, and we'll be going through in more detail this evening at the meeting, as well as I believe we're going to put the PowerPoint that'll have a lot of this information online on the website.
Yeah, I was looking through a couple of these things, and I know one of the reasons that people gave for why do you live in Portsmouth is because of the quality of schools, and that reflects me, really. That's kind of my opinion too. And so that kind of correlates then with what you say the concerns are for continuing to maintain the excellence of the school system. I think this is great, and I think, John, this should give you a big sort of help to figure out where you're going when you're moving forward in this thing.
Well, they're not only really important information regarding some of the big issues that are confronting us as a community, from a management standpoint, to create a benchmark department by department and program by program that we can thereafter work on. Now, I have every intention of sitting down with our senior managers now to go through these, and obviously the question that will be asked by me to them is, over the next year, what are you going to do to improve the numbers? Now, we might begin to compare one department versus another, and I know from having done this many times in another community, there are certain activities such as schools and police and fire that are always very popular. And there are some building inspection services,
right,
animal control services or whatever that don't enjoy that type of popularity. But we're not really comparing one department against another. We're setting a benchmark for future years, because we want to do this annually. And so each department will be able to use the results of this the survey as a benchmark, so that each year they will be required to put a plan together, and then in a year we'll be able to see how successful they are at improving their numbers. And so,
well, I think too that shows the importance of kind of continuing on to this. Once you've got it's a snapshot of what people think now, and it'd be interesting to see how frequently do you recommend doing this? Every year or every 2 years?
Annually is the best, and it really depends on budgets. We have some clients that do it every other year. What we always say is it's really how often you can implement change in your organization, in your community. If you're working hard to drive change and improve these things, it is good to track it every year, because if you're off path, we want to correct that path. And a lot of, I think it's very important what we capture within the survey. And while we've just touched upon the highlights and some of the top line, we really dig into what drives a response and what led to that response, because that's when we can work with John and his leadership to help them understand what was driving that particular response, because understanding the reasons behind really allows the team to really consolidate efforts to solve or answer that question or raise the awareness and drive that change in a positive way.
Now, how do we compare with other similar sized towns in New England, for example? There's a sort of like a New England model that pops out after a while.
Yeah, you know, I thought that the overall...
We all think we're very much the same, but I'm sure we're very different.
You know, there's a lot of consistencies. As I mentioned, you know, the taxes and those sorts of things, those always jump up as the top three. But what really separates you is, I think, the quality of life that you have going on right now shows that while not everybody is doing great financially, that folks are feeling and doing pretty well in your community, and that shows a level of education and awareness that they have about things that are going on in town. And there was a lot of really intelligent questions being asked throughout the survey by your residents, so your folks are paying attention.
Okay, so the residents are asking you all questions as well, right?
Absolutely, and we say, hey, listen, we're asking the questions here, and we joke around a little bit, but it was a great dialogue.
That sounds like Portsmouth.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, but you know, the quality of life, I think, really stood out as somewhere where you're probably ahead of like communities. I think that area where the value for what they're spending in taxes is on the higher side. But when you get into more of the, folks raising the issue of taxes, it's, hey, we're comfortable with what we're spending. We'd always like it to be a little less, but I think in your community, how the money's being spent and where those resources are going is the more important discussion, and that's where that communication, hey, this may cost us a little bit more, but here's the benefit that it's going to drive.
And that aspect looked pretty positive from the data that I saw.
I would agree. Yep.
I mean, I think maybe it's inevitable that you'll always get people to say we pay too much in taxes, no matter what they're paying in taxes. But I think the important point is that people think it's going at least in the right locations and doing things that they want to do.
There was an interesting question about taxes, and that is our citizens were asked whether or not it was their belief that we were paying a higher burden in property taxes compared to other Rhode Island communities, and the answer that came back was that we were paying higher taxes. Well, that's just factually not accurate, and so that tells us that we need to do a better job in communicating and educating, because the reality is that we're below the statewide average.
Yeah, we're one of the lowest in the state, I think.
Well, we are one of the lowest, but we are below the statewide average, and so that's just a fact that needs to get out there to our citizens.
Well, I have to say, John, that one of the things that you brought to the town was the idea of an annual report, which I think this lends itself very nicely to. And all of these things about contact with town officials and how you could, our ability to dialogue with people that are in charge in town. I think you greatly improved things like this television program, as an example.
It just seems to me odd that so many of my brother and sister managers would question the advisability of spending what is, compared to the overall expenditure of the budget annually, such a small amount to ask our citizens. I mean, we're asking our citizens to come up every year with $60 million of their hard-earned tax dollars, and the concept that it might not be worthwhile to spend a small amount, to actually ask them what they think, is kind of an odd reality in many communities.
It is, and I'd like to thank you and the town council for bringing these folks in here, because I think this was probably something we really needed. One of the things is we have so many political divides in town. You're absolutely right. I think almost everybody loves this town. Everybody loves it's just such a beautiful place. You drive over the bridge and say, God, what a place. The problem is it's just our politics. So, when you sort of break away all the politics, I think everybody's pushing for the town to be better, a better place to live, to do things better, more efficiently, and make it a great place for our kids to grow up in. And I think that's the key. That goes back to the schools issue. So there's all this kind of stuff, and I really think this will help.
And aside from thanking the town for their business, I think one of the things, to your point, is asking the residents takes a lot of the politics out of it. This is an independent, to us, we have no affiliation. And we're an all-inclusive pricing model, which means that if John and his team need us to come up and present these results multiple times, there's no additional cost for that. So we give unlimited support to this study and to the town, so there's no additional cost. So we're here to help, and we hope it's been a valuable resource for you.
Okay,
so.
And John, I'm assuming this data and the survey summary and everything is going to be up on the website?
It will, starting tomorrow morning, it will be on the website. And the beauty of all of this is that we're giving a voice to all of our citizens through this survey. Sometimes you might have a situation with 4 or 5 people that are so passionate about an issue that come to town hall or go to a meeting, and you might think that they're representative of the overall community, and sometimes they are, and what we've found is sometimes they aren't. And something objective like this really gives us an indication of what the whole community feels like.
It's a great idea, and I'd like to thank both of you for being on the program today. Michael, from the Center for Research in Meriden, Connecticut. I hope we see you back again next year, maybe.
Thank you very much for having me.
John, thank you very much for setting all this stuff up. That's it for me. Doug Smith. See you in the next edition of Portsmouth This Week.